Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop Vanessa M. I'm your host and moderator for this evening. We thank you for being a part of our conversations on a weekly basis, where we are talking about current events and all of these things through theological and justice-informed lens, talking about the Bible, talking about sex and sexuality, and so many other things. And so we are glad that you're here. I hope that you will do me a favor. Those of you that are on Facebook, and those of you that are on YouTube and Instagram, and LinkedIn, and everywhere where we can be found, X, we want you to please make sure that you are sharing with someone, letting them know that we are on right now, and we are about to have a wonderful conversation. There's so many things that are happening, going on in the world. We certainly want to send our prayers up for those who are in the direction of the Hurricane Helene happening, stirring up in Florida and supposedly hitting the Atlanta, Georgia area, the Georgia area as well. Praying for all of you all that you are safe, that you have everything that you need with regards to this particular storm. Again, we want to say good evening to all of you that are on Facebook. I see you coming in the room now, YouTube, Instagram, all the places where we can be found. And so let's find out where folks are from. We don't want to belabor the time any longer. So I see Albert Reed is here with us from Colleen, Texas. Good evening, Albert. Regina Ross is here. Harlem is in the house. Darlene Connor was here. Queens, New York is here. Ronnie McFarland is here. Pastor Ronnie McFarland from California. Thank you for being with us on tonight. Chuck Hunt is with us. Monroe, Louisiana is here. Thank you. Pastor Charles Waterson in Ohio is here. And so we welcome you all for being in the room tonight. Thank you so much. Herbert S. Jones is here this evening. We say welcome to you. Boston, Massachusetts is in the house. I see other people are still coming in. Want to give you all the opportunity to be in it. Make sure that you all are sharing this particular broadcast with your neighbor tonight, letting them know that we've got a great guest. And so we want to be here with you all tonight as we engage in this particular conversation. And so, like I said, I'm not going to linger on tonight. I want to bring forward our guest. And he is none other than Pastor Trey Ferguson. He is a minister, a podcaster, and a speaker. He has written an amazing book and it's called Theologizin Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. Let me say that again. Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. And the forward is done by someone that we know and love, Candace Marie Benbow. And you know that she's been a guest on the show as well. And so, Pastor Trey, we welcome you here to Beyond the Gatekeepers tonight. And again, as I told you, Bishop Flunder could not be with us on tonight. Certainly sends her regards, but we're happy that you are here. Will you greet our virtual audience tonight?
I'm so very, very honored to be here. Grateful that you would welcome me into this sacred space that you all have cultivated. So glad to be with all of these wonderful people from all around the place. I'm excited to share this time with you all, and I'm just humbled to be amongst you all right now. Oh snap! I think we got muted. That's all right.
No. I'm excited about this book. I see people still coming in. Reginald Nichols, as I see you all, Stockton, California is in the house. I'm going to shout you out. But Pastor, Theologizin Bigger, that's a really, really big title. And I want to know, it's a big title. Yeah, it's a big title because it makes you think. You know, it makes you think, even in the broadest sense, have I been theologizing small? You know, do I have myself in a box? And, you know, how broad is my thinking around theology? You know, and I think that for me, when I first even just heard the title before I even read any of the book, I started thinking about Like you're radically inclusive, but what ways are you not? What
Mhm.
ways you broaden yourself as it relates to the theology of God? And so certainly we say kudos to you on writing this book. And I want to hear first a little bit about yourself. I think the audience would love to hear that. And then I want to engage with you about the book.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because ultimately, when we talk about theologizing bigger, the first step is acknowledging that which we have inherited, right? Um, None of us exist in a vacuum. None of us pop out of thin air and just start going places. And so,
Right.
for me, when I talk about theologizing bigger, I'm really talking about this process of examining my inheritance in this case, theologically speaking, but so many different areas are shaped by what we've inherited theologically, from our ethics to the way that we think about who and what God is, to the way that we think about treating other people, shaped by the ideas that we've inherited. And ultimately, all of us, no matter what your tradition is, I don't care if you are an Eastern Orthodox Christian who was born in Russia right now, or you're a Coptic Christian in Egypt, or you are a Pentecostal who was born in Atlanta, Georgia. The fullness of who and what God is cannot be contained in our tradition. And I think in order to lean into the fullness of who God is, we have to be willing to admit or to name the very ways that we have been limited by what we've inherited, right? And it's not to denigrate the traditions that we come across and anything of the sort. It's just acknowledging, like, wow, God is way bigger than I could even imagine. To me, that's an
Absolutely.
exciting thought, right? And so when
Absolutely.
you ask about who I am or whatever, I'm somebody who I inherited a whole lot.
Yeah.
I inherited a rich tradition, but at the end of the day, I live in a world with people who don't necessarily have that same inheritance, and the way they've experienced life and the way that their forebears have experienced life is fundamentally different. And there's two things we can do right there. We can run away from that truth and erect barriers around ourselves to insulate ourselves, and I honestly understand that propensity and that temptation, because you feel safe and comfortable within the barriers and everything. Or we can lean into this vast and sometimes terrifying reality of a universe outside of ourselves, right? Um, and so I'm somebody who leans into questions a whole lot. Those don't terrify me anymore.
Yeah, I
And
think what I hear you saying also, what came to me as you were talking, and you said that you inherited, of course, like I did too, I inherited my mother's religion, my father's religion, my grandparents'
yeah,
religion, my great grandparents' religion. And I thought right away, give me that old time religion. Give me
all
that
right now,
old time. But what you're saying is, I can deal with my old time religion, but I know that there's more. And so
right?
be prepared to expand, right? Be
Absolutely.
prepared be prepared to expand, because everybody uh, that's in your atmosphere may not necessarily know about your old time religion.
Absolutely. And if Jesus is indeed one who came that we might have life and have it more abundantly, are we
Yeah,
intimidated by the fact of there being more outside of what we've inherited? Or somebody I see in the comments said inherited or indoctrinated to believe in and accept as religious doctrine. I think there's a very thin line. And at times, I'm not sure if there's a difference, right? Like, yeah,
that's right.
uh, if you think about like a financial inheritance or whatever, and you
Mm-hmm.
happen to be in a family where they set you up pretty decent,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really know a life any different than financial abundance or prosperity. And so if I am somebody who inherited a different type of struggle, what you see when you encounter me as somebody with deficiencies. And because you don't know anything else, it might seem to you as though this is a deficiency that is resulted from something that I did, as opposed to just what we've inherited, right? When we talk about whether we talk about inheritance or an indoctrination, I think those two are kind of two sides of the same coin. And
Yes.
the degree that we can move beyond those is the degree to which we can enter other relationships and dialogue with humility about where we are, and the idea that there is just as much validity to somebody else's lived experience as there is our own.
Let me back us up a little bit and ask you, why did you write this book?
That's a dope question. And I think for me, why I wrote the book was because when I was navigating online spaces, particularly during the pandemic,
Yeah.
as a lot of people were going through what they deemed a deconstruction process or whatever, and really questioning the faith they've inherited, what we saw happening was not just the beliefs that we inherited being re-examined, but also just the communities. As we saw, like, I think a lot of our churches were exposed over the pandemic, like, oh, without all of the hoop and the hollering, without all of this stuff, y'all don't really have much to offer. And I say that as
Right.
somebody who's committed to the local church. Like, I still serve in the local church, right? And we kind of got exposed. So I'm sitting there navigating all of these people wrestling with, oh, what does this mean that all of these things that I've been taught and all of the importance that was placed on these communities has been exposed as not being able to meet us at the highest point of need. And so as
Exactly.
I'm thinking and wrestling with these things and finding people connecting with it, honestly, I was in a fortunate enough position where like publishers were starting to reach out to me about writing a book. And as I was thinking of what that looked like, the book that I felt called to write wasn't one that most publishers were willing to take on, because it wasn't one that centered like the white evangelical experience that a lot of publishers are after. I was like, nah, at the end of the day, yeah, y'all got what y'all got, but that's not me. That's not my story. That's not what I'm really trying to talk to. I'm talking about the fact that I too have an inheritance that I had to deal with and had to walk beyond, not beyond, but had to wrestle with the fact that, oh no, God is bigger than everything I've inherited. And it's
Right.
okay to name the ways that we have fallen short of the invitation to walk into new things with God in this season. And so me writing this book, particularly at this time, was about, oh, if you have questions, it's not because you tripping, it's not because you walking away from God. As a matter of fact, it might be that some of us had to leave our communities in order to find God
That's
in
right.
the fullness of God. Right?
That's right. I love that. I see other people coming into the room. I greet you, Pastor Siegfried Benton, Temple Hills, Maryland, Sean Jenkins, Atlanta, Georgia, and we certainly are praying for you. You talk, Pastor Trey, about the Black church tradition. Say a little bit more about the Black church tradition. All Black church traditions are not the same.
Right.
However, most are. So let's talk about the ways in which they can be the same. So talk about at least from your social location.
Right. So to crib some off of the great Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, right? He says there are Black churches and there are churches with Black people. And
Correct.
I think, yeah, and there's a commonality between the two, because even for the most part, even the most conservative Black church, where like you can walk in and aside from the music, you find the same theology that you'll find in the greater white evangelical project and everything.
True.
Most of them will still acknowledge the reality of the Black experience in America as something different. Now, there are exceptions there where like people will even downplay that. But that is something that I have found in my experience and my theological education and my upbringing from childhood, growing up in these traditions, that like, oh no, like this is different. The reason that we sing like this is because of X, Y, Z, and because of all of that, right? But then when you talk about a church tradition and an inheritance, a theological inheritance that is uniquely Black. When we start, there's a prophetic tradition wherein people who were forced to live in a certain social rank, right? Like Blackness is not a biological reality, of course, but it is a political reality. It's the only
Yeah,
political identity that is assigned to you that you are then castigated for belonging to at the same time.
absolutely.
And people who were forced into this political category and somehow forged a community in there around the same, using the same stories, right? And the same
Yeah.
language as other people with a much different accent and a much different approach. Um, we've been able to hold people to account, say, like, oh, you are not living into the fullness of your faith. And for me, it's a little different. Nowadays, I identify as not only an inheritor of the Black church tradition, but I would call myself an Anabaptist, right? But that gets a little tricky when we deal with a lot of the Anabaptist organizations and denominations, because like I have a church that I launched within a Mennonite denomination, and a lot of them have defaulted into this understanding of the Mennonite church as basically an ethno religion. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
oh, at the end of the day, this actually flies in direct contradiction to what you guys are claiming about the very nature of belonging to the community of God, wherein it's not something that you are born into, but something that you believe into, that you enter into belonging with, right? And in a very similar vein that I had to hold that tradition to account when the prophetic Black church tradition like is at its height, in my opinion, is when we can say, oh, the very stories that you have told us about this crucified savior of yours, you are not honoring that story in the way that we are treating the closest political class to Jesus of Nazareth, right?
Yes, the marginalized communities.
Absolutely. So when we look at Jesus, I'm not interested in arguing about the ethnicity or the race. I don't find those particularly productive. But when we look at Blackness as a political reality, I don't really have any. There's no tension when I hear somebody like a Bishop Henry Manil Turner saying that, oh, God is a Negro, or when we hear James Cone saying that Jesus is Black or whatever. As far as political designations go, if we are to take this gospel story seriously, and we had Marcel Williams was executed last night, and the
Marcellus, yep.
crucifixion,
Yep.
yeah, sorry. And the crucifixion of Jesus tells us that God identifies with the executed class, and the resurrection condemns the power of execution. And I
Absolutely.
think there's
State sanctioned violence.
yes. I think there's a lot of power in the prophetic history of the Black church tradition to speak these things that a lot of people who have not had to live in this political reality might be more prone to missing.
Thank you for raising his name. And I certainly want to, I think his name is Marcellus, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken, but I
I'm
believe that he was also a Muslim.
Khalifa.
And he
Yes,
has
Khalifa.
a caliph. That's right. He had a Muslim name. And so we want to certainly remember his spirit and remember his family. His son was there and watched him be executed. And we have to do something about abolishing the death penalty, right?
Yeah.
Which leads me into something of your book. You talk about the white man's religion.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about it.
So the reason I framed it that way, that was probably one of them chapter titles that kept me out of the target or the framework of a lot of major publishers who want me to tamp stuff like that down. But even from a historical perspective, if we were to look, because I was talking to you earlier before we started the stream, I was born in New York, but I grew up mostly in Virginia. And one of the things that every public school student in Central Virginia, when I was growing up there at least, had to do was take a trip to Jamestown. And you go and you experience what it was like in colonial life and everything. But having grown a little bit older and examining some things, you'll see that we get to a point in colonial law where the words Christian and white are almost interchangeable.
Yep.
And what that leads to is this process by which a Black person, whether free or enslaved, could never become white or enjoy the fruits of whiteness within this construct. But you could get pretty close if you understood what it meant to become a Christian. And that posed legitimate problems because there were codes and ethoses against enslaving other Christians. And then they had to decide that, okay, Christianity will not free you from the plight of being Black. And so even as much as people want to pretend that, oh, we stand on the Bible alone, that is simply untrue when we recognize that we are all inheriting things. We all have an inheritance, right? And part of a great deal of the inheritance of the church in America is this structure that ties what it means to be a Christian to what it means to be white and enjoy the fruits of whiteness. When you think about the fact that the largest Protestant denomination to this day is the Southern Baptist Convention, which was founded for the express purpose of protecting the institution of chattel slavery, which in any decent society probably would have fallen by the wayside around the same time as the country that they helped found, known as the Confederate States of America, fell by the wayside, right? When the people who laid that foundation are laying the foundation for what is widely regarded as proper theology in this country. Like, oh no, this is a white man's religion that we're dealing with.
Sure.
And
I think we also we have to recognize the truth of it is that Christianity is baked in white supremacy, right?
yes,
Not just the white man's religion, but also white, which people try to make synonymous, but they are two different things, right? White man's religion and white supremacy, but they do walk in tandem together, right?
most definitely.
People are doing things. I mean, this state sanctioned violence that we're experiencing, because this was not the only execution this week of a black man, right? You know, it's coming from white judges and white governors that are not giving clemency, right? We talk about the governor of Missouri, and I'm off track a little bit, but I need to say this. We talk about the governor of Missouri who gave a pat on the back to a white couple who pulled out their shotgun against black protesters, but the prosecutor, and so many other people, even the family of the deceased, said this man should not be executed, and they still executed this man. That's something else. That's another kind of evil, and it's something that I do associate with white supremacy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is a degree to which we have to, okay, if we were to strip away each and every theological belief behind the value and sanctity of life and just look at the geopolitical and socio-political realities of where we stand, we have to ask ourselves what role the death penalty plays in a modern society.
Correct.
Because a whole lot of other countries that most people would consider doing pretty all right have found a way to do this thing called life without a death penalty. Like we widely acknowledge that we don't got to do that no more. One of the reasons that I can't even remember is so sad. I can't even remember the name of the gentleman who underwent an execution a few months ago with the nitrous gas or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons they had to do that is because other countries are no longer selling us the chemicals we need to administer lethal injection, because they're like, y'all need to grow up. Like, what are y'all still doing over there administering that? And like, at what point can we look ourselves in the mirror and be like, oh, this is really barbaric? And now, if we bring back the theological implications of this, we have to ask ourselves, like, what have we learned from the crucifixion of Jesus Christ? If we truly believe that Jesus was an innocent person who suffered the most barbaric torture and execution that we can imagine, is that not a very condemnation of the barbarity of state-sanctioned violence and execution? And has not the resurrection condemned that? Can we not envision something beyond that? And what is it within our souls that leads us to try to create all sorts of justifications as to why this still has a role in a just society?
You actually are rolling us on to the next question. But before we do that, I want to let everybody know who is entered. First of all, we greet you. I see Shovel Robinson Moore and other people who have come in. And this is Pastor Trey Ferguson. He has a book called Theologizin Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. And I love the play on words, loving holy, not H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-L-Y. And we want to certainly encourage you to purchase the book. This is definitely something for also a great Bible study. But again, those of you that are preachers, he is offering homilies to help you out on Sunday morning or Saturday, whenever you preach, right? Or even in your Tuesday or Wednesday night Bible studies, okay? And we have, he has been generous enough to say, hey, I'm going to give away a book tonight. And so we've got a free book giveaway coming. It's, you know what to do. Put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, all one word, no gaps in between, so that it can hit the system, okay? So that you can win this book on tonight, this free giveaway. Pastor Trey, you take us into the very next question. Why is it that we have to do these things? How can we have imagination and theologizing at the same time?
Yeah, I think the reason that we have so many of these things that I believe are far short of the wholeness that God has called us to, and the abundant life that I believe that Jesus is calling us into, is because all we're interested in is living into the fullness of the inheritance that we recognize. It kind of functions as a restraint or a straitjacket of sorts. We're
It
constricted
does.
in how we can move, and even the things that we're able to imagine.
Absolutely.
Um, I think that when we talk about being made in the image of God, part of what is being described is the capacity for imagination
Yes. I've
to
been
see
teaching about
things.
imagination. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But I believe we got to be able to see things that are not, and then believe that they can become. And I
Yes.
think that there is a degree to which the world that we live in slowly but surely chips away at that capacity
Yeah.
from a young age. And I talk about this a bit in the book, right? Like if you take two kids and you grab a medium container of McDonald's French fries and you
Hmm.
split it up between the two of them, but the piles ain't the same. The kid with the smaller pile, if we talk about a 4-year-old right now, is gonna say, that's not fair,
Right.
right? They'll immediately recognize, like, oh, they got more French fries than me. And a
Hmm.
lot of us have this propensity will teach that child, maybe not at 4, but like, hey, life's not fair. This is the way that things go. And we slowly but surely train this capacity for imagining better possibilities in a more just world out of people, to the point where we end up in school systems or in jobs or in church communities that are training us to accept certain realities in the world as opposed to imagining newer and more fuller ways of being. And I
Absolutely.
think that that is inherently dehumanizing to a
Yeah.
certain point.
Yeah. And
So when
part
I
of what's
talk
wrong
about,
with the church, though, Pastor Trey, and I'm going to just talk about the Black church, but
yeah,
probably all the churches, right?
yeah,
Is that we lack imagination.
yeah,
We lack imagination. Like our, but there have been so many traumatic events in our life
hmm,
to push the imagination away, right? Even as a kid, I can talk about, I mean, I live with a little girl, she's 11 years old, you know what I'm saying, who has amazing imagination,
yeah,
right? She's 11, but it's amazing, amazing imagination. But what happens is things happen in life. Life keeps lifing, and that imagination starts slowly taken away, right?
yes,
Bad things
yes,
happen, trauma happens, different things happen. I think that we have become adults with no imagination, which is why we're
absolutely,
always looking for young people and young adults to come back into our churches, because what they're doing is bringing the imagination back, right,
right,
to us, so that we can reimagine what church is supposed to be and what theologizing looks like and what a better world looks like.
absolutely. Because and I think there's a reason that a lot of the time when Jesus talks about who the kingdom belongs to, he says, "Oh, it belongs to people such as these, right? The little children." And he said, if you want to see the kingdom, you have to be born again. You need to hit the reset button and be like them. Because I think that ultimately, when we talk about what salvation is, it's the process by which we become reconnected to our imaginations. It's when we are reconnected with that element of our humanity that bears the image of God, the capacity for imagining these things, the power to walk alongside the creator in the project of creation. I think there's an open invitation for us to be
Yes.
co-laborers with God in that. And I think that when we become separated and divorced from our imaginations, that we are stepping away from that invitation. And the moment that we re-engage that, we can walk into this invitation and this opportunity to co-create with and co-labor with God in the project of creating a new heaven and a new earth.
I love that. Thank you for that. And then we talk about resisting shame and embracing humility. Um, hmm, it's complicated.
Yeah. So it's funny, the one part of the book that I got the biggest pushback on was the chapter, I think we got shame backwards. And oh man, I hope I'm not jumping out of order or whatever in this
Go, go,
conversation.
go. It's okay.
Yeah. And what I was trying to impress upon people is not shame for the sake of embarrassing and beating ourselves up, but I do believe that within a healthy community, there's this concept of a friend of mine was a psychologist, went to school with me and did way more impressive things than me after we graduated undergrad.
Sure.
But he introduced me, his name is Dr. Ola G. Obama Chigman. And shout out G Dave, wherever you are. He introduced me to the concept of linked fate, right? Like the feeling that we feel when we hear about another mass shooting, and instinctively we hope it ain't a black man or a black woman. Like that one thing. Like I remember the feeling when I heard a DC sniper. I said, "It's two of them,"
Right.
and they both like right. This feeling of linked fate because,
And when I
and it's
just heard
funny.
about Georgia, I
Yes,
prayed that it
oh
wasn't a
yeah,
black person that did this.
and it's true because and it's honestly a bit of a trauma response, right? Is the concept of linked fate, understanding that when you are part of a class that is viewed at near the bottom of the hierarchy, that you will always be judged by what people perceive as the worst among you, right? And
Yes.
so we hope like, oh, please don't let this be one of us. And I think that there is a degree to which a communal understanding of representation can yield to a healthy definition of same. Now, I don't mean in situations like that, because mind you, I don't know that white people feel the same way when another mass shooting, like, oh, please don't let it be another white person, because they don't feel the same sense of link, fate, and shame. But
Absolutely.
on the flip side, right? If I am out here wilding out, just doing whatever and not thinking about nobody, there is a degree to which I'm like, wow, my mama raised me better than this.
Hmm.
She deserves me putting a better foot forward.
Yeah.
That is, I believe, a healthy sense of shame because it is born out of a sense of accountability rather than one of self-deprecation.
Got it.
And and when we can lean into this sense of accountability, I think shame can be a healthy tool for modeling and inspiring better behaviors and ethics among us. But at the
Absolutely.
same time, like in the book, I outline what I think an unhealthy shame is, and that's when you're dealing with other people's unfair expectations on you, and that leads to self-deprecation and me not recognizing the God in me or what God has put in me. I
That
think
is
we got
right.
to be careful about outlining these things and differentiating them.
I'm glad that you outlined it in the book that way, and so that people can get that understanding. And I love that. And when you talk about embracing humility, I think that's the other part of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, humility, I believe, is ultimately the very posture of Christ. Like that's the lesson that we're supposed to get from all of this. And I think my favorite, I detest proof texting as a as a practice. I think it's a very unserious way of dealing with scripture. But we all got our favorite verses every now and then, right? And when we get to Philippians chapter 2, right around verse 6, where it talks about Christ who, though being equal with God, did not think of equality as something to cling to, and humbled himself, taking on the position of a slave. Meaning that the very miracle, I detest when we focus on the crucifixion as the ultimate act of sacrifice. When I
Mhm.
think that verse suggests that it's the incarnation where we see the sacrifice of God, where like, yes, I am the creative force in the universe, but I want to be with you. I want to be where you. I want to
Yeah.
experience life as you do. I want to know your hurts. I want to know the things that you pray to me about. Like I'm going to enter this story alongside of you, and so I will humble myself by entering. I will take my imperishable nature and put on corruptibility in human flesh to show you that this too is sacred. That is a very humble thing. And so,
Yes.
what that looks like for us is acknowledging that even when we are in positions of privilege, right? Like, I've never experienced what it's like to be a white person, but I am a dude, right? I'm a masculine,
You have a certain
presenting
part, you have a
heterosexual dude,
certain privilege. You do. Absolutely.
right? And so, what humility looks like for me is acknowledging all of those things and then choosing solidarity with people who do not experience life in the way I do,
That's right.
choosing to acknowledge them as reliable narrators of their own experience and recognizing that they too are the location of the very image and presence and spirit of God.
Yes.
They
I
don't
love-
become more godly to the degree that they're able to look more like me
That's
or
right.
to live life as I do, or to love the same type of person that I do. That is not what godliness looks like. What godliness looks like is us taking away all of the barriers and all of the unhealthy shames that we put on our neighbors in order that they might live into the fullness of who God has called them to be, no matter the circumstances that they were born into, no matter what their inheritance is.
Yeah. I love that. Honoring tradition and relating to God.
Yeah. That's as always a tricky one to navigate, right? Particularly as when we grow up in those traditions where I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, which means that our highest priority is getting people to understand that Christianity is the true religion, right? Despite the fact that the object of Christian worship, Jesus of Nazareth, it was not a Christian. It never identified as
Wait,
such.
before you go further, Pastor Trey, I want to acknowledge Pastor Ann Jefferson is on, and you said something before. I don't, if you like me, you may not remember what you just said, but she wants you to say the phrase again, reliable of their own experience.
Oh, yeah, be a reliable narrator of their own experience.
Reliable narrator of their own experience.
Yes. Because I think pride will often give us the impression that we can have a conversation or even just view somebody and automatically know and articulate the life that they live and their own truth. Where humility will say, like, no, I need you to tell me more about this because I will never fully understand what it is to be you. I'm going to trust you to be a reliable narrator of your own experience. Right?
Absolutely. Now let's go back to honoring tradition and relating to God.
Yes. And so a lot of us are trying to overcome this, or maybe not even trying to overcome it. A lot of us deal with this idea that Christianity is ultimately what I need to bring you into, as opposed to you walking with God. I was in Israel a couple of years ago, and I remember being so humbled by the rich variety of worship I saw. I saw Jewish people uh gathering for prayer, and it was so beautiful, like the rituals they would adopt. I heard the Muslim call to prayer as this horn goes out, and everything was so beautiful to me. And I remember being led by somebody who was a conservative, evangelical, charismatic, and he made a face one time at the Muslim call to prayer. I was like, what's going on? He was like, I'm sorry, I just get annoyed by that. And I said, I was confused. I said, we done traveled halfway around the world to these people land.
Right.
And you got the unmitigated audacity, the gall to be upset or offended by how they are connecting with God.
With the God of their understanding.
Yes. And I had to sit there and wrestle with, like, what part of the gospel is that? What part of what I don't understand that at all. Like, yes, would I find space for disagreement with some Muslims over there? I'm sure I find disagreement for Christian people I go to a church with every Sunday, right?
Exactly.
And what we have to wrestle with is the degree to which we have the nerve to be arrogant about that which we have inherited. This is, I'm lucky I was born here and I got the right way, and all of these other people are lost. I said, is your God that small?
Yeah.
That the salvation of humankind was dependent upon you being born in the right part of the world, with the right set of parents or whatever, speaking the right language to worship in this type of way? Or is there a love that is bigger than that?
Yeah. We've got 3 Abrahamic religions.
Well, it's 3 major ones. We got even more than
3
that,
major.
right?
I mean, we got more than that, but I'm just saying the 3 that we took. So, I mean, so that is one of the problems I think that is happening. And I'm so glad about Theologizing Bigger, because at the end of the day, the superiority complex that I believe that Christianity suffers from, it's what is diminishing who we are. It's why somebody can get up and say, 2 Corinthians. You know what I'm saying? It's I'm not going to go down this road. I'm not trying to make you lose your book deal. I'm just trying to say that we got situations that we as Christians need to deal with. And I think that this book helps us to see ourselves more. Okay. To see ourselves more. I'll say it like that.
Yeah,
But
and not only see ourselves more, but to see each other more, and the
yes,
value that other people provide, not only to ourselves but to the world around us. Like,
that's right.
creation is more beautiful when I can see it in high definition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's bring it down to brass tacks. I'm a kid from Harlem. You're a kid from Brooklyn, by way of Virginia. Now you're in Florida. I'm Harlem, about New Jersey, Delaware. But I guess what I want to say is that I wouldn't know about a bigger God until I saw other things,
Yes,
right? That was out of where I grew up at, which is
right.
nothing wrong with where I grew up at. But and I've gone to other countries and I've seen how other people live. And I think you got to have those kind of experiences to, and you may not be able to have those because I don't want to, everybody can't afford to have those experiences. I know people who have their theologies are bigger than mine. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Bigger than yours, right? Because they've had certain experiences. I think that you just can't put God in a box. And Cheryl Moore says it just very succinctly. And thank you for saying this. Adults without imagination will always keep God in a box. I
Oh
think
yeah.
that we want to always keep God in a box. And that is not, at least for me, that is not the God that I serve.
I think there's a degree to which I try to be as empathetic and compassionate as possible, because you're right that not everybody um, can afford all of these experiences, and truly, I can't afford none of them. I've been blessed that some people feel like I don't know. Maybe I got one of them needy faces. They be like, "You need to see some stuff," and then I get sponsored and stuff. But here's a truth of the matter: there's not one single person watching, listening to this stream right now who does not have internet access.
That's right.
And one of the things that the internet affords us is the opportunity to connect with people that we never would have, right? Without the internet. And that's something I had to come into realization. It happened probably about 4 years ago, outside of the pandemic, when like I went to school with a few white people and everything, but I never really had no meaningful relationships with any no, I won't say I want to have meaningful relationships. What I came to realize was that it is entirely possible right now. Let's take a white person, for example,
Yeah.
for them to live an entirely meaningful life without a single relationship of significance with a black person or somebody who is not also white. Like
Yeah.
that's a fact of the matter. And I realized that eventually, when white Christians found me on Twitter, it was very terrifying at first. So, what are y'all doing here? I belong on black Twitter. There's a boundary that's been crossed somewhere. But I realized that before the algorithm pushed me onto their feed, like, oh, like I don't really know that many black people or black voices. And I realized what the internet offered them an opportunity to do was to connect with people they never would have before. And
Absolutely.
so right now, the only thing standing between us and a larger understanding of the people that we share the world with is an artificial barrier. It's like one of the dogs with the little shot collar on it.
Mm-hmm.
You plant the little flags so they don't go too much further, but eventually you
Correct.
can pull up the flags and they'll just know not to go no further because
Right.
that they're used to getting that shot.
Mm-hmm.
The flags have been pulled up. We
Yeah.
walk around with computers in our pockets basically,
Absolutely.
and eventually we're gonna have to learn that, oh, that collar just there out of habit. We can go beyond that fence, beyond the gatekeepers, right?
I love it. That's right. That's what it's about. Right. And so King Nola says, privilege begets small mindedness, and the unprivileged must see the big picture or lose hope.
Yeah, that's ultimately James Baldwin really got my mind turning about this when he basically expressed that there is a certain empathy necessitated by the reality of whiteness, wherein like, oh, they are as much victims in this as I am, because they have become less human and less loving by this myth of whiteness. And I think when we talk about that, like privilege begetting small-mindedness.
I did a whole episode last week, me and Bishop Flunder, on the lie of whiteness. So
Yes.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and the degree to which like believing that will have you believe in falsehoods about yourself. Like, oh, you born on third base, think you hit a triple, and you
Yeah,
think because you see me hustling around second base, coming that all of a sudden like, I must have been born there too. No, there are different ways of experiencing this world. And in the second half of his quote right there, he said, "Privilege begets small-mindedness, and the unprivileged must see the big picture or lose hope." When you didn't have the opportunity to even see or think about the world in certain ways, and the only way out of this less than desirable plight was an active imagination and the courage to pursue it and to see things realized. Yeah, you gonna look a little crazy to somebody who ain't never had to hustle like that.
that's right. That's right. 100%. And it well, I think that like the more we talk, the more organic it is, because we roll right down to solidarity and compassion. Right. And
Yes.
I think that that's what you're trying to help us to see, right? That we've got to have solidarity and we've got to have compassion with our fellow siblings in the world. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So early on in my ministry training, when I was first learning how to preach a little bit, one of my mentors, he said that you got to learn to preach the messages that you need to hear.
It's
So when we
true.
talk about solidarity and particularly compassion, I'm really talking to myself because I am at times an impatient person. There are times when I struggle to not call people stupid. Right? Like I'm like, oh, this is not this complicated. Why are we still struggling with this basic concept? And I
Uh-huh.
get frustrated. So when we talk about compassion, it's like, oh no, there's a reason that you're not seeing this the way that I am, and it's not because I'm smarter than you. It's because
Mm.
I've had the opportunity. Like, it wasn't until recently that I realized that not everybody has the opportunity to sit around thinking as much as I do. Like, I literally
That's
carve out time just to
They
think
gotta go to
thoughts.
work, Trey. They gotta go to work.
Yes. Right. And I was like, wow, that's I didn't even think like and so the idea then that part of what made me less human was thinking that there was something different or better about me because I saw things a certain way
Yeah.
was prohibiting me from connecting with people in a real way. I actually had to go to therapy about this. Even if, like my wife was telling me, she was like, I do not enjoy when we disagree because you always worried about moving so far ahead and thinking ahead that like I feel like you're not in this discussion with me. And I realized that I was robbing people of opportunities for intimacy because I thought I had so much figured out up here that I could move ahead to the end of this conversation. I already know
Mhm.
what you're going to say. I already know what moves you're going to. And to be all the way honest, I'll be right a fair amount of time. Like what I
Sure.
think you about to do is what you end up doing. But at
Mhm.
the same time, what is a profit of man to gain this world to lose a soul, right?
Right.
What do I gain by being right about you to the point where I don't give you a chance to walk this, I don't give you a chance to prove me wrong.
Right.
I'm robbing myself and you of opportunities for intimacy. And is this world worth navigating without meaningful relationships? The very first thing that the Bible says that God calls not good is for man to be alone. Am I doing myself a service if I end up creating a silo, an empty room for myself because I've already figured everything else out? And so
So
when we talk
in
about,
response to your wife and what she said to you, what was your response?
so in all honesty, it was one of those healthy senses of shame. Why I didn't realize somebody I care about so much was feeling alone because I wouldn't step away from my mind enough to just be present with them. And so, as we're talking about solidarity and compassion, solidarity meaning like, oh, I will sit with you. I will stop trying to figure out the world so much that I forget that you are somebody who is willing. Marriage is a crazy thing. You sit there and you ask somebody like, "Hey, would you mind being with me till one of us dies?" That's a weird question to ask somebody, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
that's what
ultimately
you
what you're
asked.
asking.
Yeah.
And I asked that lady that, and she said yes. Somebody who was wild enough to say yes to that really weird and ridiculous question. And now I'm over here trying to move on a different speed and a different track, as opposed to like, oh wait, no, like you when I asked you to be with me, you said yes, and now I'm sitting here leaving you behind. I'm like, no, that's not a stand-up guy move, right? And so my response was one of interrogating why I was approaching the situation that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I gotta ask myself, why is it that why is it that I view moving this way as the right way to do it? And I really had to like ask myself, because like I said, at the same time, I don't be making stuff up when I do this, but I had to think about the fact, like, oh, am I looking for answers and solutions, or am I looking for a relationship? Am I looking to connect with the people around me? And when we talk about living freely and loving wholly, right? That's the big piece, where this is really about in the book I talk about, my definition of love is the commitment to wholeness.
Yes.
And I wasn't moving in a way that was committed to my wife's wholeness and her belonging when I'm sitting there doing like that. And when it comes to like understanding neighbors and everything, I had to get to a point where I'd be like, oh, can I still be committed to your wholeness if I don't like you? I'm not talking about my wife. I like her. She's really dope. That's why I asked her to be with me.
Right. No, of course.
But when I'm talking about the people who are like, oh no, like, yeah, I can't think of the times when I've seen you and been happy about it. There are some people like that in the world, right? There are certain people that we'll see in the news, and I'm like, oh, like you bring out the worst emotions in me and everything. But can I still be committed to your wholeness, and what does that look like and require of me? And that's where the compassion piece comes in.
And that's also where the loving holy comes in
Yes.
it as well, right?
Right, most definitely. Because one of the things that is not a whole lot of wiggle room about in my theological understanding is the command to love. Like, if we cannot love people that we can see, how can we claim to love a God that we cannot?
That's right. That's real. The expansiveness of God and humility. Now, yeah, I'm not sure. We don't have where you mentioned, if this is the chapter that you mentioned Bishop Flunder in.
So
her quote.
I'm trying to remember. I think there is a chapter entitled "Everything is a Heresy If You Try Hard Enough."
Yeah.
And I think that might be where I quoted her, because one quote of hers, the only difference between a heretic and a prophet is time.
That's right. That's a statement. Absolutely.
Yes. And I stick by that, because and it might have flown into the chapter, because we talk about the expansiveness of God and humility.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that God could put on humanity, human flesh, is still to this very day viewed as heterodox, as heretical by practitioners of the Jewish faith. Is why ultimately most Jewish people, like you can be an atheist Jewish person, but most Jewish people would say that you cannot be a Christian Jewish person, because that is it's basically blasphemy, right? Absolutely. And I hold that as true in their right to define. I'm like, okay, our faith is born in heresy. The idea that this incorruptible God, right, where Levitical law even states that you can't even join the corporate worship in the temple while you're on your cycle. These That's reminders, right. If you come in contact with a dead body, you can't be there. You got to take a time out, because any reminder of our corruptibility, the beginnings and endings of life, means that you have to take some time away from people gathering around an incorruptible God, right? Sure, the idea that same God would be made known and manifest in a human body that can not only be born of a woman and all of those things, but then suffer the worst, most barbaric execution possible and actually die. Like, that is a crazy, crazy idea.
Yep.
But that is the foundation of my faith, that God can be embodied in such a way. And so when we talk about the expansiveness of God in humility, we're talking about like, oh, what the Christian testimony is, rightly understood. I'm not talking about like the history of the Christian church. I'm talking about the elements of the faith, where we take our departure from the inheritors of the first Christians or whatever, is in the idea that this supreme almighty God would humble themselves to the place of debasement in putting on a human form in that way. And if that is who and what we believe God to be, what ought that inspire us to do? Where should we be showing up? What are the scandalous places we ought to find ourselves to make known the love of God and the commitment of this God to the wholeness of everyone?
Where are the scandalous places that we ought to find ourselves? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Where are those places? Where are
Where is
those places? Yeah, right. Pastor Ann said, you preaching now. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then respecting differences and finding shalom. We already talked maybe a little bit about it, but let's get into it.
Yeah, there's this conversation that a lot of people like to have around me about, like, oh, what does the church of the future look like? And there's this tension wherein Christianity is born in the breaking down of a barrier, right? Like that's the offensive part of the gospel, not who it kept out, but who it let in. It was like, wait, nah, like this is not what we're about. And then Christianity becomes this thing where we're drawing new boundaries around ourselves, new boundaries of belonging. And I think that if there is a future of a church that is committed to wholeness and loving holy, we have to think about the fact that, oh, ultimately, we want more people at the table, right? That we want more people at the table.
Yes.
And the question we got to ask ourselves is,
build a bigger table.
yeah. We got to ask ourselves, why are there not more people at the table? Is it because of something that they did, or is it because of the table that we're building and inviting? Like, are we the reason that the table is not as crowded as we want it to be?
Yeah, well, because there's some kind of exclusivity, right?
Absolutely.
And like when you go to a club. I mean, well, I'm not saying you go to a club, but for those people that that go to the club, you get in the club and it's general admission, right? And that's where all the general admission people go. Now but also in that club is a VIP section.
Yeah.
In that club, we all in the same space, but we ain't all in the same space.
Right. Which, even like when we look at ecclesial structures and how we think of church and everything, there's this inherently hierarchical model to everything we do, and a lot of that has to do with inheritance. Mm-hmm. But I think it's worth noting that if we take at all seriously the stories of the Bible, right, in Genesis, the very first hierarchy is directly tied to the very first time we see sin appear, right? Mm-hmm. Prior to that, in the created order, everything works in cohesion. Mm-hmm. All like the first human then becomes two people who are joined back together in one flesh, because it's not good for men to be alone. But notice that all of creation is meant to sustain them. And the very first sin we see results from one part of that creation listening to another part of that creation, and what was ultimately a lie about the character of the creator behind that creation, right? The moment that God is presented as somebody who wants to lord power over people, as opposed to giving out of the abundance of who God is and what God is capable of, that's when we start to see the first sin, right, in the garden. And then God comes in there, and a lot of times we're like, oh, I pronounce all of this stuff is how we read the story. But I like to think that it's more like God being heartbroken and describing what's going to happen. Like, if I tell my kids that they can make popcorn, but to watch the popcorn in the microwave so it don't pop too often, or it doesn't stay in there too long, because don't nobody like the smell of burnt popcorn, right? Absolutely. But they break that one rule. Like, they get distracted. They start playing on the tablet while it's in there, and they let the popcorn stay in there for 30 seconds too long. If I come down there, it's not like, oh, curse to you because you left the pot. Now the house is going to stink. Like, no, it's like, oh, man, like it stinks in here now, and that popcorn not even going to be good or whatever. God describes what happens as a result. The first thing, like, oh, there's going to be enmity between you and you. And then your desire is going to be for him. And now you're the very earth that was meant to sustain you. You're going to toil. Like, all these things are broken because, like, we didn't do this in accordance. So what I'm saying all of that is this idea of exclusivity is born of this hierarchy that is born in us believing a lie about the character of God and modeling our communities and our societies around that. That's where hierarchies ultimately come from. Because if we believe that God is one who lords over as opposed to walks with, then what it looks like to be godly is to sit on top of somebody else as opposed to walking alongside of them.
Every song we sing, Lord over my life, Lord, Lord, you reign. That is our theology. That's what people believe. Those are the songs that we sing in church, on a weekly basis. Some of the songs, you know what I mean? But I could think of 100 of them that start coming into my mind right now about the lording over
Yeah,
that God
even
does.
the very denotation of the word Lord in and of
Absolutely.
itself is is denotating the hierarchy. Which again, like part of, I'm not here to be like, oh, we need to get rid of all of that, but I do think we need to
You could
wrestle with
be,
what this.
but it's okay.
Yeah, well, we could be. I'm not personally, only because I
Right.
understand that
I got you.
when it comes to dealing with an inheritance and whatever, like they're like, oh, like sometimes tossing everything out is alarming to some people. But what I
Sure it
do think
is.
we need to reckon with is the degree to which that shapes our understanding of who and what God is. If
Yes.
there is any truth to the idea that the fullness of God is revealed in Jesus, it's the exact opposite of a God who wants to lord over. That is a God who says that my love to you is expressed in experiencing life with you,
Yes.
even taking on the worst of what you all have created for yourselves, even if it means that I will suffer the fate of this barbaric torture device that you all have created. That is how much I love you, right? And when we talk about, like, when we say Jesus is Lord, that's almost a tongue-in-cheek statement, because if it is somebody who reigns above us like that, how could they ever be subjected to something like that? No, what we are saying when we say Jesus is Lord is that the highest ideal of what we could believe is one who walks alongside us in solidarity, even to the point of taking on the worst of what we have to offer.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Pastor Trey. I want to say to the people, thank you all so much. We are listening to and interviewing with Pastor Trey Ferguson. He has a book out called Theologizin Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. While I'm talking about this, if you have a question specific to what we are talking about tonight, and I have to say it like that because sometimes people way off, for Pastor Trey, we want you to write that question down. Make sure you put the word question before so that we don't have to filter through and we know that it is a question indeed. And then we also want to invite you to know that we are doing a book giveaway. And so you can put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers for the free book giveaway to win a book. So we want you to buy a book or buy several books. Give it to your pastoral team, give it to your Sunday school teacher or your Tuesday night teacher or your Wednesday night teacher, whoever it is, so that they can have access to the book. I'm telling you, if you have some pastors, a board of pastors or preachers in your ministry, you certainly want to make that investment for them as well on tonight. So if you have questions, I need those questions now. We want to wrap up this conversation. And again, we invite you to post your question. Please type the word question before so it can be easily seen. All right. And then again, make sure you're putting hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, because we're going to wrap this conversation up fairly soon. I think I saw a question. And let us see what it says really quickly. How much does Christianity actually control the everyday life of people that absorbs the doctrine used to control every aspect of one's life?
I'll probably argue that it's even a little more insidious than that, right? Like, there's a degree to which, when we think about people insisting that the United States of America is a Christian nation, theologically speaking, that's never really been the case. But culturally speaking, no, that's absolutely true. And I'm not arguing that should be the case. I'm talking about the way that Christianity, as a cultural orientation, has shaped our society. And a lot
Yes.
of times it don't even have nothing to do with doctrine that much, so much as, oh, if we accept that this is what it means to be a Christian, that becomes the truth, regardless of whether or not it looks like Jesus or God or whatever. In the same way that, like, Judaism is not a universal religion in the way that Christianity and Islam are, right? It is both
Yeah.
an ethnic people and a religious belief system. And then you have Islam, which comes after Christianity. But even then, Islam, in most contexts, is tied to a culture in that, like, oh, you're supposed to read the Quran in Arabic. Like that's the way it's supposed to be done. Christianity is, and I want to be clear about this. I'm not trying to sanitize anything, because there's definitely conquest in the world of Islam as well, and they be doing stuff. They be trying to advance the cause. But Christianity is unique in that, oh no, we actually prioritize the translation of our scripture in the various languages, and it becomes, in some senses, right, like even when you look at the way the missionary work is done, the religion of empire, and blatantly so. And to the degree that we believe that Christianity is not properly practiced unless it is spreading, we have to understand that there's no real way to measure anybody's actual theological beliefs. And what we're actually advocating for, a lot of times we talk about that, as assimilation into a cultural model. And
Yes.
so when you ask, like, how much Christianity controls the everyday life of people that absorb doctrine, used to control every aspect of one's life, it's more than even the people who are inside of the churches. I have conversations with people who have left churches behind and left certain theological beliefs behind, but have not left this same desire for certainty and
Yeah.
this arrogance about the
Absolutism.
things that we know and
Yes.
being right. Like, they haven't left that behind, and that's a product of Christianity,
Yes, it
right?
is.
So you can leave the creeds behind, and you can leave the doctrines behind, and take the arrogance and the supremacy with you. And I think that that's a great disservice to the neighbors around us, to not evaluate those things. And I'm not trying to absolve, like, Christianity of the blame. What I'm trying to do here is speak about the degree to which um, this thing has deeper tentacles than a lot of us even recognize.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Pastor Trey. I want to bring us to a close in this conversation. What I want to do is I want to give you some, yes, social imagination, Pastor Charles. Thank you. I want to bring us to two advertisements that we need to give. But Pastor Trey, I want to give those advertisements. While I'm giving those, I want you to think about the last words that you want to give to the people that you like to say to them. Okay. So, Pastor Sue, let's go to those two announcements that I need to make. And then let's go to Pastor Trey. So, Beyond the Gatekeepers is a weekly show. Many of you have been a part of it since its inception in 2020 of May, where we talk about current events through a theological and justice informed lens. And so we want to appreciate those who have been supporting our broadcast by showing up and by giving. We want to give you and still others an opportunity to support our broadcast by sending a donation via Cash App to $TFAM annual, or to PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM justice. So 2 ways you can give. That is through our Cash App, $TFAM annual, or through PayPal, which is paypal.me/TFAM justice. We appreciate you, and we appreciate the support that you are going to give. Our second announcement is that TFAM is going to be celebrating 25 years on next year. And Bishop Flunder, who is our presiding prelate, would like to invite you to meet us in Atlanta. Our theme is still what it was for our leadership, something inside so strong. The dates are June 30th through July 26th. I'm sorry, through July 6th, 2025. That's June 30th through July 6th, 2025. We want you to stay tuned for the hotel and registration information, but we certainly do want you to hold the dates. And thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you in Atlanta. So give us those words.
Most definitely. In the beginning, when God began to create, God set all of these things in order and called all of them good. And then God created a human. And the first thing that God called not good was for that human to be alone. And so God created community. It was the solution to the first problem that God identified. And I mourn the ways that we are pulled away from each other, because I think that when that happens, we are stepping away from God's design for a unified, harmonious, beautiful, self-sustaining creation. And I think that the only thing standing between us and realizing that the wonderfulness of the unity of creation is an atrophied imagination. And I believe that the way forward is through the salvation that is offered in the idea of resurrection, life after death. After this imagination of ours has been atrophied and we've become jaded by the ways of the world, that there can be life again, that there can be breath breathed into these dry bones, that these dry bones can put on muscles and sinew again, right? And we can do all of these things if and only if we would lean into this divine imagination that we were first gifted with.
Absolutely.
And that as we lean into that, we might become more committed to the wholeness of ourselves, of our neighbors, of all of creation. And then as we do that, we will finally and fully understand who and what love is. And my prayer is that we would all accept the invitation and the challenge to do exactly that. To throw off all of the constraints that have been put on us by these atrophied imaginations, and to lean into the wholeness and the freedom that God has called us to out of the abundance of the love of God.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me in this sacred space of yours.
We certainly appreciate your presence. So we're going to give away a book tonight.
Oh, yeah. So let's do that.
Hopefully you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers in, and we got you in the system. And Pastor Sue, we're ready to go. Our winner tonight is Sean Jenkins. Congratulations, Sean Jenkins. Make sure that you give us your address inside of the Beyond the Gatekeepers messenger, and we will make sure that that gets to Pastor Trey, and he will make sure that you get a book. Thank you so much, Pastor Trey, for your transparency. Thank you for your great theological mind, and you have encouraged us all and challenged us all to love better and to think bigger. And I pray for your ministry, and I pray for your good work for the next book and the next book and the next book that will come from you. To our listening audience, we say thank you so very much for joining us tonight on Beyond the Gatekeepers. By the grace of God, we will see you next week. Thank you, and God bless you.